write about meeting some fantastical wintry characters or creatures for the very first time. In The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, he describes Lucy and Edmund unexpectedly meeting some strange and fantastical characters. You could write about when and where you may come across these characters, setting the mood and atmosphere. You could also write about what is happening and what the character looks like, and include your thoughts and feelings. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway from the wardrobe and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the doorway open, for she knew it was a very silly thing to shut oneself in a wardrobe. It seemed to still be daylight there. I can always get back if something goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow, through the woods and towards the other light. After about 10 minutes, she reached it and found that it was a lamppost. As she stood there, looking at it, wondering what a lamppost was doing in the middle of the woods, and wondering what to do next, she heard the pitter-patter of feet coming towards her. Soon after that, a strange person stepped out from among the trees and into the light of the lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and carried over his head an umbrella white with snow. From the waist upwards he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like goats. The hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet he had goat's hooves. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not quite notice this at first, because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with 2 horns sticking out, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella. In the other arm he carried several brown paper parcels. With the parcels and the snow, it looked like he had just been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a fawn. There was crisp, dry snow under his feet, and more snow lying on the branches of the trees. Overhead there was a pale blue sky, the sort of sky you would see on a fine winter's day in the morning. Straight ahead of him he saw between the trees the sun just rising, very red and clear. Everything was perfectly still, as if he was the only living creature in the country. There was not even a squirrel or a robin among the trees, and the wood stretched as far as he could see in every direction. He shivered. He looked around him again and decided he did not much like this place, and had almost made up his mind to go home when he heard very far off in the wood a sound of bells. He listened, and the sound came nearer and nearer, and at last there swept into sight a sledge drawn by 2 reindeer. The reindeer were about the size of Shetland ponies, and their hair was so white that the snow hardly looked white compared to them. Their branching horns gilded and shone like something on fire when the sunrise caught them. Their harness was of scarlet leather and covered with bells. On the sleigh, driving the reindeer, sat a fat man who had been about 3 feet high if he was standing. He was dressed in polar bear's fur, and on his head he wore a red hood and a long gold tassel hanging down from its point. His huge beard covered his knees and served him instead of a rug. But behind him, on a much higher seat in the middle of the sledge, sat a great lady, a very different person, taller than any woman Edmund had ever seen. She was also covered in white fur up to her throat, and held a long straight golden wand in her right hand, and wore a golden crown on her head. Her face was white, not merely pale, but white as snow or paper or icing sugar, except for her very red mouth. It was a beautiful face in other respects, but proud and cold and stern. The sledge was a fine sight as it came sweeping towards Edmund, with the bells jingling and the driver cracking his whip and the snow flying up on each side of it.